Welcome, everyone, to this IAVE Let's Talk Volunteering, exploring future issues and trends focused on research from Asia Pacific. We are hoping that this webinar will enhance understanding of global trends in volunteering by bringing together some key recent research from the Asia Pacific region. It is part of an IAVE 3 webinar series that started in January with the first webinar exploring 3 pieces of global research published in 2021. This was IAVE's own research, a leadership for volunteering, the COVID-19 experience, Forum's COVID-19 and the future of volunteering for development research, and the United Nations Volunteers Programme State of the World's Volunteerism Report 2022, Building Equal and Inclusive Societies. And showcasing the findings within these 3 strategic reports and considering the issues that jointly highlight what this means for the future of volunteering. But IAVE was also aware that research is happening in regions across the world, and we felt that we would look at 2 regions. One was Southeast Asia, and the second one in April will be Europe. And this webinar brings together research from Singapore, Indonesia, and Australia. Now, a lot of the research has been based on the COVID-19 experience because that has been such a challenge for the world and also a challenge for volunteering. But some of the research is also not necessarily focused on that, but is research which is pertinent to volunteering currently and going forward. And whatever the research is, I think what we want to use these sessions for is to explore what it's telling us, but also to tell us what it's saying about trends for volunteering for the future. What does it mean for the next decade of volunteering? And I know that this webinar will provide lots of information and lots of discussion on trends. And although it's based on information from Asia Pacific, it will have resonance across the globe. And we know that this webinar series will be listened to by very many people, and we hope that they will be informed. So I'm delighted to welcome you here. And I'd like to introduce your moderator for this webinar, who is Shalabh, who is co-founder and director of iVolunteer India. And Shalabh has been involved for a number of years, over 19 years, in working in India to establish an organization, the first of its kind, and to develop volunteering. And it's now directly engaging 17,000 volunteers each year. And it's a leader in the volunteering community in India. And iVolunteer as an organization is now renowned nationally for its innovative practices, collaborations with the corporate sector, and for pioneering skills-based volunteering. And Shalabh has been a friend and member of IAVE for a number of years, and we're delighted that he is with us today to moderate this session. I know that everyone who is participating will find this very worthwhile. I would encourage people to put your questions and comments in the Q&A box and take part in engaging with us in looking at volunteering and exploring what volunteering holds in the future. So the session is now over to you, Shalabh. Thank you very much. And thank you very much to our other panel participants.
Thank you, Wendy, for this great opportunity, and a warm welcome to all our audience and participants. I know that several of you will be joining from across the globe. We asked a little panel which is spread across, and I'll be briefly introducing the panel as well. So I'm sure it's a different time of the day, evening, and possibly night, and early morning in different places. So very warm welcome from wherever you've joined in, and thank you. So research is really critical to the progress of any subject, and that includes volunteering. However, when we look at Asia Pacific as a region, I feel that we have often fallen short when it comes to research related to volunteering. Thankfully, this situation is fast changing, and different countries, different regions within Asia Pacific are now bringing up knowledge in different formats, whether it is formal empirical researches, case papers, white papers, case studies that are coming up. So it's really good to see that IAVE has also taken this opportunity to organize a session specifically for the Asia Pacific region on Let's Talk Volunteering, exploring future issues and trends, which is the topic for our discussion today. A very warm welcome once again to all of our audience. Now, in this webinar, like Wendy just said, that we have research from 3 different regions within Asia Pacific, from Australia, from Indonesia, and from Singapore. Now, the first one I'm going to talk about a little bit is of the Future of Giving 2021 report that was published by the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Centre, NVPC, in Singapore earlier this year in January itself, so just about less than 2 months back. This research focuses on preparing for future challenges in the giving landscape and how to create a future that we want to live in, and that we need to understand where the seeds of that future are in the present. How will the giving landscape look like in the next 10 years? And what causes will people focus on in the future? Who are the untapped pool of givers? What will people give? And what are the key trends that will shift and shape the way people give and receive? So in that sense, I think it's a very future-looking research, and we'll be learning more about this. I'm also kind of very, very much inclined to understand how Singapore is looking at the future of volunteering and what can we learn from the same and execute in our different parts of our work. The next, we will be talking about the COVID-19 Impact Research Program that was published by Volunteering Australia. And we'll focus specifically on the continuity and change volunteering during the COVID-19 pandemic, which was again published in December 2021. So just a few months before the research that was published by NVPC Singapore. And this research raises important questions about how we might better support volunteers as the pandemic continues and how we might prepare for the future. So of course, pandemic almost kind of, disrupted life as it is across the world in so many different ways. And volunteering, which is so integral to our community and to our personal life and to our social life, was also disrupted in several ways. So as I understand, the Volunteering Australia research will focus more on what was that disruption like, and what did we learn from it, and how we might prepare for the future on the same. So that's the research from Volunteering Australia. And the third research that is being spoken about comes from Indonesia, and it's about volunteering contributions in Indonesia to the Sustainable Development Goals during COVID-19. And this was done just a few months before the Volunteering Australia research in June 2021. The United Nations Volunteer Program Bangkok Regional Office and the NGO Indorelawan conducted a survey of volunteer contributions in Indonesia to inform a submission to the Government of Indonesia's Voluntary National Review 2021. And these reviews report on a country's progress to meeting sustainable development goals. So we learn a lot about how did the volunteers contribute, how did they change the landscape of volunteering during and as a response to COVID-19. And I again have a lot of personal interest in the same, simply because, as I volunteer itself, we did contribute a whole lot. And I think the way that we were organizing volunteering before and during the pandemic changed significantly. And I do want to learn about how it was done in Indonesia and look forward to kind of learning about it. Now, a quick note to all the participants. First of all, again, thank you for being here. I'm sure that you will be taking keen interest in each of the presentations and the panel's different discussion points. So you will have a lot of questions, I'm sure. Please note your questions in the chat box on the side of this webinar. We will be compiling all of these questions. And there's a question in our time that has been reserved towards the end of the panel discussion. And the questions that you share in the chat box, we will be asking these questions on your behalf to the panel members. So please continue to note your questions. You don't need to wait towards the end of the webinar to note your questions. You can just start noting them as and when they come to your mind, and we'll take them up in the Q&A. Keep it lively. We're looking forward to an engaging discussion. So please do put in your questions. And yes, in the invites, and you would have seen the different hashtags of IAVE and this webinar. Please do tweet about it or share your understanding and learnings in the wider media. We definitely are looking forward to looking at different ways and perspectives of volunteering from within the Asia Pacific region, from within your countries, and from across the globe. So please do kind of share anything related to this webinar more widely in the social media as well. So I'll come to now introducing the presenters. Our first presenter is going to be Gloria Arlene. Gloria has over 12 years of experience traversing the public, private, and public sectors across Asia. As a social impact professional, her work brought her from ground level work with human trafficking survivors to policy discussions with C-suite leaders and political office holders. Her expertise ranges from research, advocacy, policy analysis, social entrepreneurship, journalism, to cross-sector collaboration, a whole lot of depth of things that she's done. Gloria is currently the Deputy Director at the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Centre in Singapore, where she heads two key portfolios. One is Collabs, focusing on galvanizing systems-level collaboration on complex issues, and Futures of Giving, which shapes the direction of giving ecosystem in the next decade. And definitely our research is very much in that direction. Gloria was previously a pioneering member of NVPC's Knowledge and Insights team, helming various national studies and thought leadership pieces in the giving space, and held research roles at the Singapore Press Holdings and within the Singapore Public Service. She was also the co-founder of Chapter W, a non-profit social enterprise empowering Indonesian rural women through technology and entrepreneurship, and a micro-angel investor in Jubi, a tech startup supporting social commerce for merchants in Southeast Asia. So welcome, Gloria, and we'll hear from you in a while once I've introduced the other speakers as well. Next, we will have Mark Pearce, the Chief Executive Officer of Volunteering Australia, the national peak body for nearly 6 million volunteers. Driven by a strong belief in the power of compassion, Mark applies the skills and expertise he gained over his 27-year financial markets career with JB Ware, Macquarie Bank, NAB Asset Management, to helping organizations which reduce suffering. As a non-executive director of the Community Council of Australia and on the board of sustainable food company Grows Limited, Mark is keen to advance equity and opportunity across the society. In addition to a passion for human rights, Mark is active in fighting for animal rights as well, and is a deputy chair of Australia's leading animal protection organization, Animals Australia. Mark holds a BSc in Politics and International Relations and a graduate diploma in human rights, and is currently studying for a master's in public policy at ANU. Mark, I need to kind of take this inspiration from you and continue actually learning through some of these formal programs as well. And then we have from Indonesia, a panel of speakers. The first one is Miyeon Park, the Regional Portfolio Specialist of the UNV Regional Office, Bangkok. Miyeon has been in her current role since March 2018, prior to which she served as a UNV program officer in Mongolia and Indonesia. She also worked for the IOM mission in Azerbaijan and for several international NGOs, managing community development and environment projects in Laos, Cambodia, and South Korea. So you see across a good part of the region that we're talking about today. Miyeon holds an MA in Environment, Development and Policy from the University of Sussex in UK, and a Bachelor of Political Science and Diplomacy. Bachelor of Arts in Chinese Language and Literature, and Bachelor of Arts in East Asian Studies from Eva Women's University in South Korea. Miyeon, a lot of degrees. I also need to pick up some of them. Then we have Retha Dungga, co-founder of Indorelawan, Indonesia. In 2012, the organization was founded as a way to help youth find volunteering opportunities and to bridge the resources gap in nonprofit organizations. Now, almost a decade old with more than 215,000 users and 6,500 volunteering activities registered, Indorelawan.org is still the biggest platform that connects volunteer and nonprofit organizations in Indonesia. With experience as the first executive director in the bootstrap phase, today Retha serves as one of the strategic advisors to the Indorelawan executive team. Additionally, she has 12 years combined experience developing programs to engage youth in the anti-corruption sector in 3 ASEAN countries and community organizing for policy advocacy in the Indonesian arts and culture sector. She's a graduate of the Australian National University with a master's degree in applied anthropology and participatory development. And we also have Marsya, or called Asa Nurmaranti, who's the executive director of Indorelawan Indonesia. In 2012, Asa started to spend her weekends teaching marginalized children. The memorable experience as a volunteer for that community led her to take the big decision to follow her heart and change her career to the nonprofit sector by joining Indorelawan as a full-time community manager. She created content for the organization's social media to engage youth to be interested in volunteering and joining Indorelawan.org, and also collaborated with CSOs to create volunteering events. In August 2019, she became an executive director for Indorelawan, leading a small team to make a big impact. I like that statement, small team to a big impact. Very much what we also try and do at iVolunteer. Recently, during the pandemic, Indorelawan and other NGOs collaborated with the Indonesian Ministry of Health to mobilize 3,500 digital volunteers to help collect data on the emergency department of hospitals in Indonesia. In the next 5 years, Indorelawan has plans to mobilize 1 million volunteers for Indonesia. I personally connect a lot to the journey of Indorelawan as well, having co-founded iVolunteer in India as the first organization and the largest today with, and I'm really impressed by the journey that the organization has seen, and I'm very much looking forward to learn from your journey as well. So welcome to all the panelists once again. It's a rich panel of from across the region, and with such kind of diverse work experience and the deep volunteering experience that each of you come up with. So we're looking forward to very enriching discussion. Once again, to all the participants, please keep your questions flowing on the chat box. And with that, let me invite the first panelist of the day, which is Gloria, to talk about the recent findings from NVPC Singapore. Gloria.
Thank you very much, Shalabh. Hi, good morning, everyone. Am I clear? Am I audible to everyone?
Yes.
Good. All right. Great. Thank you so much. So it's such a pleasure to be re-invited to IAVE to share about this piece of research. It's a research that is very close to my heart. The team spent about a year or so just putting this together. And as Shalabh has very well introduced the research earlier, it is a foresight research. So the intent is really to help us to look around the corners of what might lie ahead, what trends we can ride on, not entirely anchored or in or around COVID-related impact, but really more about future-proofing the organization or sector strategy. So I really hope that this can spark some thoughts or, hopefully resonate with your observations in the various countries that you're coming from. Next slide, please. So I will start by introducing a little bit about the National Volunteer Philanthropy Centre, NVPC. We are really the national body in Singapore that promotes giving in all its forms. So we also run the national giving platform, giving.sg, where anyone can search for donation, volunteering opportunities with locally registered charities, also create a fundraising campaign, etc. True to our name, we started really with volunteerism and philanthropy. It is still very much a big part of what we're doing in NVPC, but increasingly we are interested in other manifestations of giving. I think we see many of such, right? Giving in kind, micro expressions of giving, and even factors that are enabling giving, things like community development, cross-sector collaboration, digital giving, and so on. So I think our vision has correspondingly grown. So we talk increasingly more in terms of creating a city of good. What would a city of good look like in Singapore? So this is really the vision that we have for Singapore. Next slide. So just to set a little bit of a context, when you'll hear a lot about giving as part of this 15-minute sharing that I have, and in our definition, the giving that we have in mind, I would like to offer this for everyone to consider, is really not just about volunteering or just about donation, not just about a behavior, right? But also that transfer of help or skills, even tasks, giving your advocacy, giving your voice, and even other assets. I mean, one example, the interesting example these days is Grab points, right? All of us have Grab points, maybe in various forms. Are those something that we can increasingly donate in this digital economy? So I just want to put it out there for you to consider. Giving is also about mindset, not just behavior. To us, giving is about adopting other-centered mindset. What do you give? Not being self-centered, but for others, right? Giving one's best for others. And lastly, giving in the sense of it potentially being a lifelong habit, a new social compact towards a caring and cohesive society and a part of who we are. Not, I mean, in our context, it's Singapore, but I'm sure it is something that all of you can also resonate with in any country. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. So I'll just quickly go through what the Future of Giving project is all about. Essentially, this is a piece of research that we undertake to identify systemic shifts and emerging signals of the giving space. We broadened the parameter quite a fair bit. And the intent is really to recommend how the organization, as well as the stakeholders in the giving space, can then navigate these new realities and co-create the preferred future. Next slide. Just click on it. I think it's an animated slide. Thank you. Yes, so this is a little look at sort of how we are scoping the trends report. We look at 3 tiers essentially of research. So we start by looking at the macro trends, very broad, the usual PESTEL sort of environmental scan. Then we look 1 tier down, which is what we define as the giving ecosystem or the operating environment of giving. So this would be the typical stakeholders that we interact with day in and day out in NVPC. So this would be your corporates who are, your corporate givers, the CSR players, the policy makers around us, the nonprofits, that's a very big part, the charity groups and so on, and also even the funders and foundations, right? How are they affected and affect giving space in turn? And right at the core of it, of course, would be the givers themselves, the volunteers, the donors. We split this into 2. So we look at those who are already giving or donating or already volunteering, and givers of tomorrow. So these are essentially people who are not yet giving today. What stops them from giving? What stops them from volunteering? So it's a fairly all-encompassing remit, as you can see. Next slide, please. This is how we did the fieldwork. This is largely a qualitative study. We started by a horizon scanning, literature review on those various aspects that I outlined earlier. And specifically, we speak to 75 respondents. So there's also a very wide range of diverse people that we speak to, ranging from men on the street, really, right? We have volunteers, we have donors, we have even people who are traditionally seen as receivers, people who are like security guards, cleaners, low-income family, single mothers. So that is sort of one end of the spectrum, all the way to the corporate leaders, the policy makers, even some political office holders who provide us with really high-level, overarching kind of direction in terms of how giving might be shaped in the next decade. So we do this in interviews, one-on-one interviews, as well as a workshop participants, more with the men on the street, because I think the dynamic is very different. So that's really the approach that we take in terms of method. Next slide. Okay, next slide, thank you. So I'll start by outlining a changing notion of giving. So this would be going to the meat of the discussion, really. So through all these conversations, what we have realized is that there's really an evolving sense of what giving means to different people. So I've just extracted quite a few sound bites that we have also shared in the research report itself. So Dr. Kanwaljit Soin is somebody who is, a very notable name in the nonprofit space. She was also a previous member of parliament, and somebody like her, she started by by challenging conventional notions of giving. So her challenge statement is, why not? Why do we give? Why not think about doing away with giving? Are we going to just continuing doing good by ensuring giving, or is it a deeper question about facilitating change so that there's less need of giving? Because when you think about giving, typically there's a notion of somebody who gives, somebody with the resources, and somebody who is lacking in resources who receives, right? So there is an inherent power dynamic. And should we be more concerned about why that power dynamic exists in the first place? What leads to this structural inequality, rather than just, volunteer and donate in order to bridge this gap? So that was a very powerful question right at the outset, actually. This is also sort of echoed by the next respondent, Ms. Prema Mati, who is also from the nonprofit space, somebody who is a very seasoned player in the practitioner space. And in her mind, in an equal society, ideal equal society, there will be no giving, because everybody, appreciates the different resources that they bring to the table. It's not always equated with having means, having capital, but it could also be in terms of having talent, exchanging talents, right? So the traditional principles of giving in her mind actually perpetuate inequality and social stratification. And how do we challenge this so that it is more of a circular, a lateral flow of various forms of and gifts? So another very, very challenging perspective to us. And of course, our senior minister come up with, share a very overarching perspective in terms of, it is a lot deeper than just giving. What is being given? What's the behavior? But it's about what is our sense of ourselves as society, right? Who do we see as a collective others? Who are the others that we identify with, and having that natural and genuine interest in each other and a sense of responsibility to each other. So I thought to start with this because I think it was some of my most favorite quotes from the entire research, which really resets the entire context of how we think about giving. Next slide, please. I'll go quite quickly for this. I think this is just some of the evolving ways and expressions of giving that we have identified. So a selection of trends, right? So the first one would be the emerging players. So this gentleman, whom we have selected to represent this is actually Anthony Hulahan. He's an expat in Singapore, and during the COVID period, he actually took this additional role out of his own accord as a delivery rider, as a gig worker, which is an occupation that you don't typically associate with expats, right? Any country. And he rides to raise $100,000 for Children Cancer Foundation in Singapore. So we thought, hey, is there something that we are missing out here, right? What is the role of foreign talents, of expat community, even of youth, new generation of philanthropists who are traditionally not associated with whom we have in mind as volunteers and donors? So that's emergent players. Emergent channels, I alluded earlier to, the possibilities of a digital space, digital giving. This is an example of what Grab does with us, actually, in terms of encouraging people to donate their Grab points to charities that are listed. So again, very creative ways of giving beyond the traditional cash giving or in-kind giving. Enablers, AI, machine learning, right? In Giving.sg, what we do is actually to create an open API to enable partners to then start the digital giving journey with us. And lastly, for short of better word, is this sense of emerging sensibility and consciousness, right? People are talking about democratization. People want to have a say in policy making, participatory governance. People are increasingly being more careful and more mindful about what they consume. They want to make sure that things are supplied ethically sourced. So all this also sort of have a space in terms of shaping the giving space for us. Next slide, please. So in a nutshell, I think what we are seeing is this really expanding notion of giving. So it's a little bit small, but I hope you can get a sense of it or refer to the report for the details. I think what we are seeing really is an evolution of a transactional notion of giving, a one-way, I give and you receive, a monetary transactional form, one-off kind of giving, to something that is a lot more organic, a lot more circular, a lot more lateral, right? So we're talking about exchanging of benefits. If I am giving something, am I also receiving something from the from the community that I give to, receiving wisdom, receiving perspectives, receiving humility even, right? So that kind of appreciation of intangible benefits of giving. Is it also just about what you give, or is it about the mindset, about the values behind the action? And even the definition of giving has expanded. So the outer circle are the newer values that we are hearing from givers, right? Even just providing a listening ear to somebody, that's not exactly volunteering, but it is a form of giving your time and attention in this, you know, that contributes to others' mental well-being, for example. So very, very interesting observations that we have seen from this study. Next slide. I will go really quickly to the drivers and trends in the next segment. So I'll start with sort of like the operating environment of giving, right? Again, what are the various forces that shapes the giving space? And what we're seeing here is 5 key shifts in the space. So increasing dynamism in public policy making among the policymakers, right? This is talking about participatory governance. It's not just about policymaker comes up with a policy and everybody follows, but also about consultation, getting the citizens to also have a say in terms of what they want to shape and implement the policies. A maturing corporate citizenry, I think, you know, MNCs, even smaller and medium enterprises are increasingly speaking in terms of corporate purpose, ESG, environment, social and governance kind of metrics. How do they define corporate giving? It's not just CSR anymore. So that's very interesting for us to take note of. More forward-looking funders and foundations. So we're talking about impact. It's not just about giving money. It's also about like, how do I know that the amount that I'm giving creates a lasting impact, not just in terms of output or numbers. Revitalization of people sector is interesting because we are talking about how do we professionalize charity space in Singapore? How do we make sure that, you know, it is not just people with goodwill or passion, but it's also about how do we professionalize the space so that, you know, so that the kind of services are held to a certain level of quality. And lastly, of course, a more participative and civic conscious community, a more confident community and neighborhoods to take matters in their own hand and take care of each other. Next slide, please. So this is really sort of a nutshell, an infographic of the various trends and drivers that we have identified. I'll just leave it here for, you know, 20 seconds or so. I think just to outline, there's 6 drivers and 22 trends that we see across. So the big buckets, the colorful buckets, there are really the big drivers. And I would say perhaps this is not surprising for many of us. Most of us, if we're in the space of doing horizon scanning, would probably see some kind of similar drivers and trends. So I'll just very quickly run through them. Next slide, please. Yes, I'll start with shifting demographic dynamics. I think all of us, different countries, we would have, you know, aging population is a global trend, right? We know the population is aging. We know that the millennials and the Gen Z are becoming the future leaders as this demography grow. There's a rising affluence, especially in the Asia Pacific region. I think in Singapore in particular, we are seeing, you know, a lot more global headquarters coming in and increasing to the contributing to the rising inequality and rising wealth, and also the role of non and naturalized citizens. Next slide. So the big question that we want to pose here is, how might this changing demography, right, changing affluence, how might giving help to strengthen the social capital to overcome that ideological fault lines that might arise? So one example, when you have an aging population and millennials coming to fore, those are very different generations with very different sensibilities. How do we make sure that there is no, you know, the fault lines and the ideological differences are bridged, and how does giving contribute to that? Likewise, I think for the aging population, how might we encourage more seniors to volunteer rather than just seeing seniors as a beneficiary group? So that's one big question that we're grappling with. Next slide. This is really about evolving social compacts. So I think in different shades and forms, right? So in Singapore, what we're observing is that there's inequalities, there's increasing social division. There are even things like strengthening identity politics, right? Even situations like in a multiracial country like us, we are seeing a lot of tension as well in terms of ethnic background, religious background. How do we divide? How do we heal that divide through giving? Next slide. And the big
Gloria, if you could try and wrap up in the next minute or so.
1 minute, right, cool, thank you. The big question here is really around social compact and how do we then again bridge that latent class and socio-cultural, even generational divide in Singapore. Next slide. I'll skip this. I think this is relating more towards the businesses, but I think just want to acknowledge that there is a changing role of businesses and how businesses can actually shape, corporate volunteerism and so on. Next slide. I'll just skip the next slide, actually. One more slide. Okay. People sector relates to the charity sector. I think all of you will also see this. Again, there's a diversification of funding sources. So people, there are foundations that people can tap from. There are venture philanthropies increasingly. So how does this diversification of funding sources give new opportunities for charities so that they can be more creative, more innovative in terms of what they are proposing and the service delivery that they give? Next slide, please. I'll skip this. Thank you. Right, digital acceleration, I think, affects all of us. Maybe Indorelawan can also share a little bit more about that. I think what we're seeing here is that more platforms, more digital platforms are available for giving, right? People are giving, donating through digital means. So what does that mean then when there's still a digital divide in some countries, right? Not all populations are on board digital. So how do we make sure that giving is still available for everyone equally? Next slide, please. I'll skip this, thank you. Lastly, I think we just want to make a note that it's also not just about individuals giving within the country, but also about how countries give to each other, right? I think in the current situation that we are in with the crisis in Ukraine, I think all the more important, we need to consider how can each country also adopt that giving stance. Next slide. I'll skip this. Lastly, so I'll just land with the key takeaways here, just 3 key takeaways for you to consider. So one is to consider giving space as this cross-cutting, boundary-spanning space and not just a charitable giving. How does that shape everything else that is happening around us? The second one is around unlocking the potential of today's receivers, so seniors, low-income family, how do we then encourage them to also become a giver? And lastly, new forms of collaborations. Of course, with more players, there are more collaborations that we'll need to advance. How do we then also increasingly tackle complex and interrelated issues by working together and create sustainable impact? I'll just end there. I know that I overrun my time. Thank you very much. And I'll be happy to address questions at the Q&A. Back to you, Shalabh.
Thanks, Gloria, for such an insightful and a deep research. I'm sure a lot of us, so there's limited time because of which, of course, we couldn't go as much deep, but it seems so exciting. So thank you for this. For all the audience, please do, chat. Please put up your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A over there on the side. We'll take this towards the end. Gloria is going to remain to answer the questions towards the end. So thank you, Gloria. We now move next to Volunteering Australia. So Mark Pearce, the CEO of Volunteering Australia. Mark, I invite you to present about your COVID-19 impact research for all of us. Thank you.
Thanks, Shalabh, and greetings to everyone from wherever you might be in the world. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that I'm coming to you from. I'm in Canberra, Australia's capital, on the lands of the Ngunnawal people. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and also to Ngunnawal country, from which we, and certainly I, living on this land, gain so much. I further extend my respects to any First Nations people who might be joining us today. It's a pleasure to be with you. I often start in terms of some public discourse around volunteering in Australia, and I think it probably relates to every part of the world, but certainly there's some specifics around Australia which are really very interesting. The first of which sits around this idea of custodianship, custodianship of community, custodianship of land and country, I suppose. In Australia, we live on the lands of traditional custodians who have been involved in community participation for over 60,000 years. We are part of an unbroken line of community participation and support. It's something that we are very aware of at Volunteering Australia. as the national peak for volunteering within this country, wanting to ensure that there is community participation, that there is support within communities, that we're looking to be as inclusive, integrative as we can in terms of the policy that we develop, the policy that we provide guidance on, the advocacy that we undertake, the sector development that we pursue to ensure that communities within this country are as safe and as resilient and as inclusive as they possibly can be. Inevitably, we have encountered quite a bit of change over the course of these past 2 and a bit, 3 years. COVID has been a primary, if not driver, it's highlighted a lot of ongoing change, systemic change, structural change, which has been taking place within this country. And rather than focusing really on the nuts and bolts of this particular piece of research, which we entitled Continuity and Change, I suppose I wanted to talk at a high level about some of our findings, run through some brief slides, and then get into some learnings, things which we are looking to in terms of the establishment of a national strategy for volunteering, the engagement with the volunteer ecosystem as we move forward, and certainly in terms of directing Volunteering Australia, our national volunteering peak bodies and the broader volunteering ecosystem to ensure some of those goals that I mentioned earlier on. If we could go to the next slide, please. So running through this really quickly, and I won't go through line by line, the data that we collected is nationally representative, it's probability based, and it provided us with a good baseline as to what was taking place within the volunteering ecosystem at a point in time. And what we found, I suppose, were, and it's quite the collection, but there are 21 themes, key themes, which we identified as being pertinent. I've just listed a number of those there. These will be familiar to all of you, I'm sure. As I read the press, I'm always amused by, we talk about, this is the Australian spirit, this is the Indonesian spirit, this is the American spirit, whatever it might be. But the spirit in community is similar. I think that when there are times of challenge, and even when there aren't, we are looking for ways to engage within community, to build community, to facilitate better outcomes for individuals, and importantly for ourselves. And this is one of those things that I'll talk a little bit about as we run through this. As I say, I've listed some common themes here. Connection and a sense of purpose are fundamental to those, and I think that they are quite universal. There's also this idea which comes into the personal sense of keeping active, keeping busy, and being connected with community. That lack of connection, that loss of connection with community, with that purpose during COVID-19 was really very pertinent. And I think it speaks to a theme, to a part of volunteering, which isn't oftentimes, certainly within this country, isn't oftentimes highlighted. And that is that, yes, volunteering is fundamental to the health of the country, economically, socially, environmentally, personally. And the personal one is the one that's oftentimes missed within the key themes which are identified in policy. But the benefits that come to individuals, the benefits that are derived by individuals from volunteering, by participating in community, are really very significant. And it's only when those things are taken away, when they're no longer available to individuals, that we tend to see them identified. And so whilst I suppose we always look for silver linings to every cloud, COVID-19 has provided us with an opportunity, and certainly evidenced by this research, to say, yeah, of course, there are really significant things which volunteering contributes to community in general, but there are also very significant benefits which volunteering provides to the volunteers themselves. They can't be overlooked. They can't be just pushed aside and assumed as a given. They need to be focused on and resourced and highlighted within policy. Obviously, one of those additional ones was the challenges which have been derived from the public health restrictions through COVID-19, where people haven't been able to volunteer. Organisations haven't been able to deliver on mission, and the volunteers themselves and the communities that they they reside within and the communities that they serve have suffered as a consequence of that. Next slide, please. So here, what we identified, I suppose, coming from this research was that there was quite a significant diversity of experience. This is to say that for some people, there was a continuity, that there wasn't really much change, that despite all of the disruptions that may well have otherwise been taking place within communities and at a national and, of course, international level, which manifested in economic challenges as well as social challenges, for some parts of the volunteering ecosystem, nothing much changed. Work continued. The ability to be able to volunteer was unbroken. For other parts of the volunteering ecosystem, there were really very significant challenges. There were very significant deviations from what people were used to, and certainly what communities were used to. This diversity of experience, and I've highlighted some of the key points here, but I think that there are some easy takeaways. First of which is that online became far more prevalent. Figuring out ways to continue to connect with community, to continue to connect with purpose through technology was something which, whilst it had been building and whilst it had been developed by a whole lot of volunteer involving organisations and non-organisation communities, really came to the fore. How do we best serve our communities and our volunteers in ways that we haven't done before? That idea of flexibility, that idea of innovation, which is a fundamental core of volunteering, was challenged. And I suppose volunteering in many ways came out with a number of solutions. Utilisation of technology was one of those. And that had both positives as well as negatives for both communities and for volunteers themselves. There were some positives. Hey, it enabled us to do the sort of work that we do without necessarily having to turn up to a place. We've been innovative in terms of being able to deliver on mission and on purpose without actually having to be physically in one spot. That said, whilst that was a positive, it also created a number of negatives, not the least of which was the fatigue, what we might term Teams fatigue or Zoom fatigue, or pick your platform and whack fatigue after it. Spending a lot of time on screens is really, really very fatiguing. It takes a toll. It takes a toll both for those who are recipients of the volunteering work, but equally for volunteers themselves. I think that we saw that there was a bit of a divergence, and this is where this theme came in around continuity and change. As I say, for some, fine, you get on and do it, wasn't really problematic. It wasn't really affected, but in other ways, it was really significantly affected, to the point that for a number of volunteer involving organisations, and I'm talking obviously within the institutional frame at this point, and I'll talk about this difference, this emergence, this refocus on what volunteering is, how it can take place within community in both the institutional frame and the non-institutional frame, the formal volunteering through volunteer involving organisations, and then communities themselves getting together without structures and getting things done, which is really exciting. These have been emergent themes as well, and they also have been a consequence of this diversity of experience. If we can go to the next slide, please. So, the volunteering experience during COVID-19, and whilst this is very much focused on COVID, I will take some time towards the end of my time with you today to talk a bit about what this means and how this translates. So obviously we were looking for an understanding, better understanding of how volunteering had changed. We speak a lot about, volunteering is changing, and that's a bit of a given, but it's also a problem. When we talk about things being in the process of change, it can often stop us from making the fundamental structural system changes that we need to reflect those changes which have already taken place. So when we talk about these experiences, they are reflective of a change which has taken place, not a continuity of change or a persistence of change. And I think for us, as we approach this period of developing a national strategy for volunteering, the understanding of the fact that things have changed, drawing a temporal line in the sand, so to speak, is really important. A couple of key takeaways here. People who volunteered at the same frequency in the time that led up to this particular survey were more likely to have reported positive experiences. Those who volunteered less had a reduced satisfaction in their volunteering. And so we've seen a bit of a split. We've certainly seen a very significant reduction in the number of volunteers, formal volunteers that is, in Australia. So to give some sense of that, and this is pertinent to our ongoing discussion and to the reflections that we're seeing within this piece of research. If we think about volunteering in Australia in 2011, around about 36% of Australians volunteered their time within organisations and into community, which is a reasonably large chunk. By 2019, that had fallen to about 29%. Still, it was about 6 million volunteers, 6 million formal volunteers in this country in 2019. As we entered into COVID, we saw that fell by 2/3. So fully 2/3 of volunteers stopped volunteering altogether. And when you think about the importance of volunteering, the importance of volunteers and the connection that they provide within community, to strip away, to use a contentious term, 2/3 of your labour force really saw massive impacts both on the volunteers themselves and obviously within the communities that benefit from volunteering itself. One of the, and I spoke a little bit about technology, both providing some avenues, but also creating some negatives. And that's evidenced in this last point. And what it says there is that for volunteers who continue to volunteer, they saw increased workloads. And those workloads were oftentimes both in person, but utilising technology, oftentimes for people who weren't particularly technology savvy. Digital literacy is a huge problem for all of us to overcome. For some countries and some regions, we do it better. For some, we don't do it as well. It's a persistent theme for all of us to get our minds around, both access to technology, but also the digital literacy side. Understanding the fact that for those volunteers who remain within the volunteering ecosystem and those who are entering the volunteering ecosystem, oftentimes for the first time, the increased workloads are really significant, and the health risks which are associated with those are equally significant. This is a theme that I'll talk to as I wrap up here, but it's one that I'm particularly passionate about, and this is the definition of volunteering within this country, which leads into then a broader discussion around the strategic consideration of volunteering. If we can run to the next slide, please. We'll talk about what's next.
In the next minute, so.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I think, and I'll leave this slide largely as read given the time constraints. What I will talk about is the development of the national strategy for volunteering, because we haven't had a national strategy for volunteering in this country since 2011. Volunteering is a huge part of every community. The fact that we have a huge labour force where there's no strategy is a major problem. That manifests in a whole lot of different ways, not the least of which is that if you consider the Australian labour force, paid labour force is about 13.4 million people. If you consider the unpaid labour force at about 6 million prior to COVID, that's not included in a strategic sense in terms of the planning at a government level for workforce planning. So we plan for 13.4 million people, and yet the number is closer to 20 million. The national strategy for volunteering will look towards this sort of issue, but equally to reduce the fragmentation that occurs within this country that's associated with volunteering and volunteering effort. It's a big piece of work. It'll be underwritten by a significant piece of research. Research, as Shalabh mentioned at the very beginning of this, is fundamentally important in terms of the work that we do, the advocacy that we undertake, and the policy advice that we give. This piece of research that I've referred to today, I've covered in reasonably high-level terms. I encourage you to go and take a look at the research itself. It's interesting. It gives you a sense of some of the change that's taking place in Australia, but I think it has pertinence and has some lessons to tell as we move through the course of the next period, and obviously it has some jurisdictional relevance as well. In the interest of time, I'm going to wrap it up here, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark, for kind of those that detailed understanding of how COVID has affected volunteering in Australia, and it is much wider applicable to the rest of the world and definitely to Asia Pacific as well. Thanks for that, Mark. For all the audience out there, thanks for keeping in your comments flowing. Such encouragement to each of our speakers. Please do also post your questions. That will be great. And a gentle reminder, the hashtag for this particular webinar is Let's Talk Volunteering. So when you're making a social media posts, please do tag us as hashtag Let's Talk Volunteering. Thank you. So next we'll move on to Indonesia, and I call upon Miyeon, Retha, and Asa to present their findings from the research. Please. Miyeon?
Sorry. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shalabh, and hello, everyone. This is Miyeon from UMB Asia Pacific Regional Office. I'm very pleased to share about our experience last year. I will share brief background on how the volunteering survey in Indonesia was initiated last year, and more detailed information on the research itself will be shared by Indorelawan colleagues, Retha and also Asa. So last year, on the occasion of the Voluntary National Review, we initiated the survey. For those who are not familiar with the Voluntary National Review, in short, VNR, this is the follow-up and review mechanism of the 2030 agenda. Although we see the contributions of volunteers to achieving sustainable development goals as the cross-cutting means is more widely recognized, still the evidence generation and also the integration of information related to volunteers' contribution to the Voluntary National Review is not really systematically done. But thankfully, in Indonesia, government has been doing the Voluntary National Review every 2 years since 2017. And Indonesia government integrated information on volunteerism, but that was more related to the disaster risk reduction and also disaster response, how volunteers contribute to those efforts. And last year in 2021, Indonesia government was doing the third Voluntary National Review, and we wanted to support more engagement of volunteer stakeholders and also inputs into the report. So we teamed up with the Indorelawan, which is the well-networked the platform in Indonesia, and also which has the vast database on volunteer involving organizations and also volunteers. And the significance of the survey, we see last year, we managed to do nationwide, despite the COVID-19 and also the challenge to cover vast Indonesia, the locations. We carried out the survey nationwide. And we could manage the data and also qualitative data as well. And we could see how volunteer involving organizations and volunteers are volunteering, supporting across different sustainable development goals related, especially in the COVID-19 circumstance. And based on the survey findings, we could provide more substantive inputs to the Voluntary National Review. On the sustainability and way forward, Indonesia government will do the Voluntary National Review every 2 years. So we believe this is a good milestone for us in the volunteering sector as well. So every 2 years, we aim to provide substantive inputs to the reports. And that's why we want to continue the survey every year, not only every 2 years. Also, this year already we started the volunteering survey for 2022 as well. So we see the different trends, changing trends, and also the context of volunteering in Indonesia every year. And we could provide more solid inputs to the report. And also, I think, like a long run, we believe once we have these solid evidence and also like the analytical pieces, we will be able to, how can I say, to reflect this information, like knowledge and information to policy and also strategic document and programs as well. And also this year, we already like engage other partners like IPB University and also Relawan Nusantara. So we aim to work with more partners so we could work across the Indonesia, involving more survey respondents and also promoting volunteerism across the world. And I believe this way, like we can make the survey more sustainable, engage more experts and also truly owned by Indonesia. Thank you very much. I will pause here and then over to Retha and Asa.
Hi, Miyeon. Thank you so much for the introduction. So hello, IAVE, esteemed speakers, happy to be here. I'm seeing attendees coming from New Zealand, Manila, Malaysia, Hong Kong, even from Africa, US, and Europe. Thank you for attending. I'm connecting from Sanur, Bali, and it's about 9 in the morning here. So I'll introduce a bit about Indorelawan. My friends and I formed Indorelawan in 2012 as a way to connect young people with civil society organizations who provide plenty of opportunities to learn about various social missions. So you see in Indonesia, in reform era since 1998, NGOs in Indonesia proliferates, and also our younger age population is very big. It's more than 160 million are under the age 40. And our younger millennials and Gen Z is thriving, and they are curious, they are thirsty for experience and experiments, while on the other hand, plenty mission-based organizations, especially the mature ones, are stiff and cloddish about embracing young generations to the way of their organization. So Indorelawan is there to help bridge the knowledge and experience gap in creating and managing volunteer activities. As Shalabh mentioned in the introduction, we currently have more than 230,000 volunteers and 37,000 organizations with more than 7,000 activities registered in our platform. We define volunteering as pro bono activities organized by mission-based organization. So to do it, one must register herself to the organization. Activities could be short-term, it could be done in 1 to 2 hours, or could be in long-term. We suggest no more than 3 months, maximum 3 hours per day. And longer than that, organizations have to consider paying for the labor. So when UNV approached us about VNR, we were hesitant at first, not because of the opportunity to research, but the enormous population as data to undertake is so huge, while the time to conduct it is very limited as we rush to the VNR input time window provided by the government. So and at the same time, we learned that the request was twofold. First, to link volunteering activities to SDGs, and second, to see how pandemic affects volunteering activities. Given the time constraint, we decided to mix the methodology. First, to get a broad sense through quantitative survey. We had 10 days to figure this out. And in day 11, we managed to release a survey, which we opened for 10 days. About 7,900 respondents engaged the survey. However, after further scrutiny, only 6% of them completed it. So in total, there were 351 individual respondents and 129 organization respondents. In the qualitative phase, we interviewed about 28 representatives of organizations. Next slide, please. Here, I want to show you the distribution of the individual respondents. 79% of them resides in Java, which is this island here below, the darker blue area. Majority are between 21 and to 31 years old, which indicates that they are in between university and young professional phase, college university students, first-time job holders, and those between the 3rd and 5th year in their career. Next slide, please. Well, for the organization respondents, this is the distribution. Organizations are the entities responsible in providing volunteering opportunities. So therefore, they mobilize the volunteers. It's consistent with the volunteer distribution. Majority of the organizations that became our respondents are based in Java, which indicates organization hold their activities and mobilize the volunteers locally. Next, I have my friend Asa to share about the findings of the research and our learnings from the research. So over to you, Asa.
Okay, thank you, Miyeon and Retha. Hello, everyone. My name is Marsya Nurmaranti. You can call me Asa. I'm the Executive Director of Indorelawan. Thank you for the opportunity to share our work last year with UNV. So I will explain the key findings from our research. In the left side, you can see that there are majority of the respondents contributed actively in education, environment, and health sector. So those are the most popular sector to volunteer in. And you can see also almost 32% of the respondents spend less than 10 hours volunteering between 2019 and 2021. So mostly they are participated in volunteering events like 1 or 2 hours a month in their spare time. But interestingly, on the other hand, around 24% also spend more than 90 hours doing volunteering activities. So this group is what we call as super volunteers because they're actively dedicating themselves to social causes, although they may not be a professional in the sector. And our respondent also give a multiple answer regarding the categories of their volunteering activities. About 72% of the respondents use volunteering activities as a way to express their intention to help others, to express personal interest or passion, and provide service to the community. Our respondent also state their expectation to the Indonesian government. About 70% of the organization hope that there will be a more collaboration opportunities for volunteering activities with the government programs and get the financial support to organize volunteer activities and also get a capacity building to their organization. Okay, next slide. And another findings in our research, almost 73 organizations created COVID-19 response program, and almost 90s involve volunteer. Despite their mission is not in health sector, but there's a sense of crisis that compels them to act and create activities and mobilize volunteers. And about 50 organizations did a hybrid online and face-to-face method. Is the most frequently method running volunteering programs during pandemic. They show that organization has the adaptability and tenacity in dealing with the changes, as limited physical interaction has not hindered them to create volunteer activities. And 65% individual respondent participate as volunteer do the top 3 activities. There are educational campaigns through social media, distribution of safety equipment for medical personnel, and distribution of goods package for underprivileged community. For example, one of the volunteers we interview mentioned he created educational campaigns in his social media to fight misinformation about COVID-19 and created campaign to spread fundraising information. Okay, next slide.
Sahai, if you could please try and wrap up. Then.
Okay. And another research finding, 60% volunteer help leave no one behind. They are helping underprivileged community, those are marginalized or difficult to reach. And you can see the organization, the respondent, from 17 SDGs goal, majority of the organization focus on these 6 SDGs. And next. Okay, this is the last one. Volunteer respondent also discuss how they are mostly related to SDG 4, 3, and 6 in general before pandemic. But when during pandemic, they are slightly change focus with the highest percentage in SDG number 3 on good health and well-being, about 60%. So this makes sense because we are in a health crisis situation. And SDG number 4 on quality education is most of the respondent focus on education. Like the challenging is like online learning, especially for marginalized community. Is challenging, and because there's a lack access to the internet and the tools. And the last is zero hunger, SDGs number 2. One of the most common voluntary activity for this SDG are distribute good packages such as rice, cooking oil, especially for underprivileged family. The last from the research, we knew that SDGs are complex. It's not easy concept, not understand by many, but we know that volunteers have a contribution to contribution in numbers of SDG goals. So this year, we hope that our research with UNV and other partners will give more data, more insight, so we know what's the volunteering trend in Indonesia this year. Okay, thank you for your attention. Terima kasih.
Thank you. Thanks, Asa, and thank you, Retha and Miyeon, for sharing these findings. I relate so much very well, and it's amazing to see the kind of contribution that the volunteers have made. So with this, we move into the question and answer session. Once again, a request to all the participants, audience, if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat box or in the Q&A box. The Q&A box, which will be towards the right-hand side on the bottom, which you can use to put your questions. There's also a chat box, and we'll take your questions as and when they come in. Once again, the hashtag for this webinar is Let's Talk Volunteering. So please do put in your comments, share your experience, your own learnings on the social media from the same. So I'll begin with the first question that I actually have, that I'm sure all of us wanting to know from Mark in Australia. Of course, in the flood situation in Australia is all over the news as well. And please tell us, how's it over there, and how is Volunteering Australia and volunteers in general what are they trying to do to kind of help people and society in these moments of crisis?
Thanks, Shalabh. It's an interesting time. At present, we have very significant floods taking place on the eastern seaboard in Queensland and New South Wales. They are historic floods of historic proportion. Interestingly, and perhaps unsurprisingly, volunteers are always the first responders, despite the fact that there may well be formalized mechanisms in place to assist communities as and when natural disasters or disasters of any sort occur. It's the people within community which are invariably the first responders. And I think that sort of speaks to a broader sense of the need for a greater understanding and resourcing of volunteers as a fundamental part of the both supportive and assistive structures within communities. Volunteers, we've seen, as I mentioned previously, we've seen a significant fall in the number of formal volunteers in this country, but there has been an emergence of informal volunteering. This is people just, putting up their hand and saying, there's a problem, I'm happy to try and solve it, or at least assist as I can. One of the challenges for us as a national peak is to find ways to facilitate that, to resource that without creating barriers and institutional structures which stop people from wanting to do it. So I think that we're seeing that there's far from an empathy deficit in this country. There is, if there is such a thing, an empathy surplus. Lots and lots of people want to help, and they want to help in any way that they possibly can. It's finding ways within the current restrictions and in the current circumstances to enable that, to better resource it, to better provide protections for that, whether it be through insurance, whether it be through reducing red tape, whether it be through better information system facilitation. They're key themes for us to consider as we look forward. But as I say, I'm always thrilled to see the amount of people who just put up their hand and say, I'm very happy to help, I want to participate. And that hasn't diminished. It's about finding ways for them to do it.
Thanks. Thank you, Mark, for that. Gloria, there was a question for you from the participants. Though you've responded to it in the chat box, but I think the others will also benefit from the same. So the question is, Gloria raised the issue of converting seniors from receivers to contributors, and often said that unless people are introduced to volunteering at an early age, they're harder to engage. So this question is from Roger, who says that this is my experience, especially with men who often do see the real value of volunteering beyond the payment. So any conversion techniques, Gloria? So that's the question for you. You can unmute it.
Yeah, thank you. I tried to address that in the chat. At the risk of going down the gender stereotyping, what we've really observed is in terms of the broadening of the definition, really, right? I think when it comes to volunteering, people do have that association of institutional volunteering, right? You go to somewhere, be it a home, be it an institution, and then you kind of, spend a couple of hours with them on a Sunday afternoon or something like that. And I think that does create some kind of barriers because, the distance, the time commitment, the regularity. So we did some studies, a national landscape study quite similar to what was shared by the other presenters. And I think what we're getting is that creates some barrier towards people wanting to start to volunteer or even continue. So one suggestion that I think we're trying out here is really whether volunteering becomes a lot more accessible when you broaden it. So not just institutional or formal volunteering, but if you can just, help to volunteer with your peers at office or with your peers in school to come up and maybe do something to the low-income kid in your neighborhood, for example, then would that not be a lot easier because then you have that flexibility? Or even a suggestion that I made was some kind of a skills-based volunteering, right? For seniors in particular, they have such rich life experience, such rich skill sets, right? Many of which have probably become quite archaic in our time. So I don't know, analog photography, for example, right? Folks who are interested in that would definitely benefit from a sharing of such skills. So that might help to ease in, encourage this group of volunteers who are non-traditional to the space, who take the baby steps towards giving of themselves.
Thank you. Thanks, Gloria. There's another question, this time for Marsya in Indonesia. It was stated that in the research that education, environment, and health sectors attracted more volunteers than other sectors. This question is from Nada Rochevska, and so she wants to know, do you have any information, what is the interest of volunteers for sports or mega events, as we know recently that Indonesia has started to host many mega sport events. Is there presently any sporting volunteering culture in the country? Any research, any findings, anything that you can share related to that?
Okay, thank you, Nada, for the questions. We have not the research or the findings, but we did participate in one of the biggest events in 2018. We participate in Asian Games. So we can see that there's a big response from the young volunteers, especially they are in the college age. So there's an opportunity to join, but there's not many events from now. But we see that when we participate in one of the event, we see that there are many young people trying to, trying to embrace the euphoria and trying to want to do something about for the nation. So we see there's a big most of them want to spend their time once in a lifetime to join the sport mega events, and we see that many of them are about like in the age of maybe 17 to 25 years old. So that's the data that we know from now. Maybe Retha want to add some insight?
Yeah, sure. So Nada, thank you for your question. It's tricky with mega events. As Asa mentioned, we helped organize Asian Games volunteer a few years back. I think it went very well. A lot of volunteers signed and they did their job well. But in the eye of the organizers, we need to emphasize over and over and over that volunteers are not free labor. So we ask them to to provide benefits for the volunteer. Like, yeah, volunteers are there, they help the events run very well, but they also need to provide stuff that will make volunteering works well, like foods, drinks, rest hours, place to rest, and then maybe other benefits like extra tickets for their families or their friends, just to keep them happy and do their job well. So I guess that's my my extra 50 cents. Thank you.
Thank you, and it's actually the sporting culture is also picking up in India as well. I think as a lot of other developing countries, mega events being organized, right from big sporting events to even marathons that are becoming really big, and there's a lot of volunteer attention for the same. But it also takes away the focus in a certain way. The people who volunteer for these mega events expect more of support versus I think people who volunteer for direct social other social causes. So that's been my own experience seeing this in India. Okay, so we have one more question from a participant from Stephen. Volunteering fills the gap in the work required for communities to persist. However, as we face further disruption like we're facing these days, should we see every citizen as exposed to deficiencies in the services and breakdowns in the market? So yeah, that's a interesting question. Does anyone of the panelists want to go for it? You can unmute yourself and go for. Yes, Mark, please go ahead.
This is a fantastic question. This is a fantastic question because it strikes to the heart of that which is a community responsibility and that which is a government responsibility, taking into account, obviously, there are further responsibilities with corporates and philanthropic organisations and the broader fabric of society. I think that this question needs to be asked both in a domestic sense, but internationally as well, because, as I say, it strikes to the heart of that which is appropriately provided by the state for the appropriate and ongoing facilitation of strong and resilient communities. I think that for far too long, volunteering and volunteers in particular, and whilst volunteers have always been happy, as I say, to put up the hand and assist, as and when there's an opportunity, have been assumed as if there's a gap, as a function of a market failure, volunteers will just step in and fill that gap. And that's just not appropriate. It's not appropriate because what it does is it diminishes the intrinsic value, that personal value of volunteering. It commoditizes volunteering. It puts a basic wage level on volunteering as just a service delivery methodology and doesn't in any way provide any recognition, awareness of the fundamental intrinsic personal benefits of volunteering, the things which volunteers can do, which organisations of a non-volunteering nature can't, the contribution that volunteers make to their communities because this is something where they truly believe in the cause, in the mission, in the purpose. And I think it's where market failure occurs, volunteers shouldn't just be assumed as being the obvious and immediate response.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Very kind of critical question that you responded to. Okay, the last question from the public I'm going to take in before we kind of move into the wrapping up side. So this one is about, do any of the countries present over here calculate the economic value of volunteering to the society? Any panelists that you think in your country you do it, pieces, and if you can quickly just respond to, we don't have much time for this, we include it. So anyone, does any country specifically calculate the economic value of volunteering society? In India, we don't. We are doing that for specific projects, but not at a country level. Okay.
Yeah, it's the same here in Indonesia. We haven't done that, but there is a way to do it. We can calculate, how much is the, if a professional person would do it, how much he would charge for it, and then we could just calculate from there. But like nationally, we haven't done that. We done it in projects.
Thanks. I think yes.
I think likewise.
We haven't done it here. Sorry, please, Gloria, go. Thanks. We haven't done it in a consistent fashion in Australia. It tends to be on a replacement cost basis. It comes back to that commoditization issue. We will be looking at it, however, in an engaged fashion during the national strategy for volunteering process and the research piece. So I'm going to be particularly interested to see what comes of that.
Yeah, I just want to echo the rest of the panelists. I think we tried to do so, and we like what Retha was describing. I think we tried to do basic calculations in that manner, but we haven't actively kind of pushed it. And on a personal note, I rather think that this runs counter to the point that Mark was raising earlier in terms of whether assigning a value to volunteering effort then might entrench this perspective that, hey, this is something that is quantifiable, and therefore the expectation of this being a free labor to replace a paid labor will become even more pronounced. So I'm just wondering why, what is the motivation to actually do this calculation if you're trying to undo precisely that notion?
Okay, thanks, Gloria, for bringing that other perspective as well. And so my final question to all, we had a lot of other things piled up, but I don't think I do all of that, is in one line, can you share how can we contribute to making volunteering a global thing, a global structure, a global support system for volunteering, especially given, the recent pandemic, the times that have changed, the new normal out there in society. What's the instant thing that comes to your mind that we can do to support volunteering globally? Mark, do you want to go in first?
Sure, I will. I will say very briefly, I think it's through forums such as this. It's the sharing of information, it's the undertaking of research, and it's the reflection of what's working within various jurisdictions, and the ability for us in our own jurisdictions to take those case studies away and be able to have engaged conversations with decision makers at a government or other level around that which can be achieved. So I think that both the practical as well as the aspirational discussions that we have within IAVE forums are really fundamentally important. I see that as a key way of moving things forward.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Gloria, would you want to go next?
Yeah, I think I echo a lot of what Mark mentioned. I think also just to tie back with the points that I raised earlier in the presentation, I think I think at the end of the day, it is really about encouraging more people to come forward. So whether people resonate more with term volunteerism or helping or sharing or serving, I think we do what we can to encourage more people to come forward and experience that joy of really, being other-centered and giving to others. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Gloria, for that quick one. Indonesia, who would want to, any one of you, if you can.
Okay, I think Asa and I share the same perspective. First is to recognize the enormous benefit of volunteering, like wider network, life-changing experience for both the volunteers and the organization. Then I think we need to systematically bring in schools, universities, and companies to provide volunteering experiences as part of their I don't know, assessment or curriculum. Like, I get the conundrum. It's compulsory volunteering. It's very baffling. But certain aspects in the activity should be provided with plenty options to choose, like the theme, social issues, organizations, kind of activities, etc. It's about, you know, bringing volunteering experience more systematically, I guess, and bringing more people to experience it. So yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Retha. And I do think that, you know, I agree with all of you, what you've said. And as we look at, you know, what has been the experience the last 2 years, and that's also driven by the new trends that are developing in volunteering and the social norms around. And I think we need to both support the volunteers and the public out there as much as we leverage them, which just comes also very strongly from the NVPC research about, you know, trying to understand what are the new trends, and, you know, people are looking at volunteering and giving in different ways as well. And of course, the pandemic has reshaped everything, including our work practices, you know, including our social practices, family practices. So we do need to look at all of them together. And it's forums like these that we actually have insights to share and learn from each other, which can actually forward. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to all of the panelists, Gloria, Mark, Miyeon, Retha, and Asa. Thank you for being here. Thank you to the organizers, IAVE, for this lovely opportunity, Wendy and Jessica, Jessica behind the scenes, Wendy, of course, for giving us the opportunity to do this. We had amazing participation from several countries across the globe. Just name a few: South Korea, New Zealand, Philippines, Australia, Laos, Malaysia, Hong Kong, USA, Indonesia, Taiwan, Nigeria, Australia. I hope I've not missed. In case I've missed any, sorry for that. Good day ahead to all of you, and a good evening and good night, depending upon where in the world are you joining us from. Please do continue you know, sharing your experiences with this hashtag Let's Talk Volunteering, and have a good day ahead from Shalabh, iVolunteer in India. Thank you.